Okay, here we go. You're on.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Amy Clark, and I am here to talk with you about how we can move our mission forward by grounding our messaging in racial justice. I'm the Communications Director of SEIU Healthcare 1199 Northwest. We are a union of over 32,000 healthcare and behavioral health workers in hospitals and clinics and other settings all across Washington State and in Western Montana. We have members at DESC, Catholic Community Services, and Lifelong. And because we have members in in shelters and sort of similar settings, that gives us the ability to direct some of our legislative advocacy efforts at the state and local levels to homelessness and housing policy. So we have a really strong connection to the work that all of you do. If you recognize my name or my face, it may be because I used to work in housing before coming to labor. I was communications director at the National Housing Conference and National Low Income Housing Coalition in DC, and at the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance here in Washington. Just a little photo from back when we could do conferences in person, but now this is my standing desk situation, which is an ironing board that my dog just yesterday figured out that he could climb onto. So hopefully that won't be what happens during this presentation, but just so you know how I'm living my pandemic work life. So our goals for today. First, I want to spend a little bit of time reviewing kind of what we already know and what we're already doing in terms of how people understand the information that we're trying to get across to them and the messages that we're using, the best practices that we already have in place. We're going to spend some time taking a look at some of the research into the audiences that we are trying to communicate to and get a sense of how they're thinking, who they are, and think about how we can communicate the most effectively to them. And then we're going to dive into the race-class narrative, which hopefully many of you have already encountered before, but we're going to take a look at how this particular messaging strategy can help us build support for our work. And we are also going to take a look at some ways that we can incorporate the race-class narrative into our existing message framework. Based on the run-throughs that I've done of this presentation, I think I will probably be wrapping it around 10:30, 10:35, something like that. So a little earlier maybe than some of the other sessions. So we'll have a little bit more than just 5 minutes for questions. So please do share questions in the chat. I'm excited to get to those. So what do we already know about how people think and perceive the messages that we get across? So one of the things that folks in housing and homelessness in Washington State have really been a leader on is thinking about framing. So we know that all of us filter information through our existing frames of reference, our past experiences, media that we consume, the kind of mythologies that exist in our lives from our families, that kind of thing. And all of that comes together to sort of be the lens through which we perceive the world around us and understand new information. So if you are someone who grew up in a labor family, your parents were teachers, you went out on the picket line with them when teachers went on strike in your parents' district, that's going to color your perception of, say, an article like this about a potential strike at a hospital, and you're going to maybe have some questions about why the newspaper framed it as the medical center preparing for the strike. But if you're someone who's a hospital administrator, you're going to have a lot of empathy and identification with the way that this news was framed. So we know that everyone is kind of coming to information with these different frames, and it's a little bit unpredictable. how people are going to then perceive what we're trying to get them to understand. We also know that there are all kinds of cognitive biases. We all have them. Implicit bias is something that we've been talking about a lot in the last year or 2 or 3 years. But there are all kinds of different biases, and instead of going through all of them or naming all of them, you know, we just know that there are sort of shortcuts that all of our brains take for a variety of reasons that kind of get us to conclusions that might not be completely factually based, or maybe pretty loaded based on the biases that we have. So all of this comes together to say that we really can't rely on chance if we want people to understand the work that we're trying to do, the messages that we're trying to get across. If we want people to understand the world even close to the way that we do, we have to use good messaging best practices, frame things in a way that will help people understand the work that we do, our goals, in the way that we need them to in order to move things forward. So we know, and we're using a lot of these best practices already. So leading with values, right? Trying to connect with people on sort of a basic level, at a high level around things like opportunity or fairness, knowing that if we set that baseline, then it's a lot more likely that we'll be able to engage with them and pull them in to what we care about. We also have done a lot of work to help our audiences see problems in the full landscape. So instead of just focusing on an individual or a family and their story of struggling with housing unaffordability or with homelessness, we look at the whole picture. So what's the impact on the school system? What's the impact on the economy? What's the impact on the environment when people don't have the housing they need, and when we are able to build affordable housing for everyone who needs it? We also spend a lot of time talking about aspirations and solutions. So instead of focusing really exclusively on how bad the problem is and how big the problem is, we paint a picture of this sort of aspirational future where if we actually accomplish these things, if we're actually able to build dense, affordable housing, create walkable communities, build connections for people, right? This is the world that we could all be living in. So we talk a lot in those terms. And we use data to support our messages, but we don't use data as the message, because we understand that if all of us are coming to this world and this work with very different biases, very different frames, there's no guarantee that people are going to look at a set of numbers and perceive it the way we want them to. So we frame it, and we use the data as a way to support what we're advocating for and what we're working for, but the data, we know, isn't the message itself. So this is generally how our approach to effective messaging has played out. This is the kind of message that we come up with. Kids learn better, parents can work better, and everyone is healthier when we have safe, stable, and affordable homes for all our residents. Coming right out the gate with a value statement. But today you could fill Key Arena with the number of kids who don't have a place to go home. We're framing the problem. We're doing it in a way that kind of shows the magnitude, right? Key Arena, that's pretty big, but we're not digging in and spending a lot of time on how terrible the problem is and sort of drowning folks in those details. We can solve this problem. We know how to help families and or prevent their homelessness and return to stable housing. We have what it takes to solve this problem. Okay, that's great. By building new affordable places to live in this neighborhood, more kids and families in our community will have a safe, stable place to call home. So the solution is right there. And it's a solution that, again, connects to that value from up at the top and is going to help all of us. So I thought we could take a little trip over to Twitter. Those of you who spent a lot of time online may have seen this before, but there's a clip from a 2017 Frontline special on housing that's been making the rounds lately, and it's pretty interesting.
Some residents voiced concerns about traffic, others about overcrowding in their schools.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And some were worried about having low-income housing in their neighborhood.
Why did you pick this spot?
Nicole Humphrey is a local opponent of the development.
What is your concern when it comes to Section 8 and low income?
The lifestyle, I feel like, that goes with Section 8 is usually working single moms or people who are struggling to keep their heads above water. And it's not, I feel so bad saying that, but it's not, it's just not people who are, I guess, of the same class as us, which sounds bad, but I don't mean that in a bad way.
Some people would say, look, they maybe have not had the opportunities that their kids are not going to have the opportunities that your kids are going to have in this neighborhood.
Right.
Can they share in that?
The problem with that is I hear a lot of the unfair of, oh, we haven't been given this or not that, or we haven't been afforded things that you might have been afforded. I don't look at multimillionaires and think, why don't I have a yacht? Why don't I have a private jet? It's a mindset, I feel like.
Do you think that you maybe are stereotyping the folks?
Oh, I totally am, 100%. It's not, it works both ways. I'm definitely not a racist and I'm not bigot, but I think I hold a little bit of a stigma against people who are different. We don't want nomads. We don't want people who don't have roots. I just don't want that to be what my community is about.
All right. So hopefully that was clear enough that you could hear at least a little bit of it and see that conversation. So what are some of the things that you noticed? What I noticed is that our friend Nicole here really tries to frame exclusion as being about class, and she dove right into kind of attempting to create solidarity with the reporter, someone who's upper middle class, white woman, professional, the same class as us, right? So she's building this connection and this solidarity. And she uses all these euphemisms, right? Single moms, lifestyle, nomads, rootless, people who are struggling, kind of walks all the way around what she's really talking about using these euphemisms. She admits that she's stereotyping, but she claims that she's not racist and that she's not a bigot. Now, editing certainly could account for this. Maybe there's a whole part of the conversation where they talk about race explicitly, but we don't see that. So what we do see is that even though there was no explicit discussion of race in the rest of that clip, she knows that she needs to defend herself against being called a racist or being called a bigot. So all of the dog whistles are there, right? And she knows exactly what she's talking about, right? She wouldn't be defending herself against potential claims of her being racist or having bigoted ideas if she didn't know exactly what it is that she's really talking about with all of these euphemisms about single moms. So we may be bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? When we're using this colorblind messaging. We're working really hard to talk about all of us, all kids, all parents, all families, all people, but we're not making explicit what a lot of what the work we are doing is all about, right? But our opponents are being, in a dog whistly way, very explicit about the racial and racist component of their opposition to our work. All right, so let's take a little bit of a step back and think about sort of all of the folks who we are communicating with. So in the process of building the race class narrative, which I promise I will get to what the race class narrative actually is, but in the process of building the race class narrative, the folks who were involved in its development did a lot of research into the supporters, opponents, and sort of persuadable folks around progressive policies. So a whole range of things, including but not limited to affordable housing. So we know that folks who are likely to support the work that we do, they get systemic racism. Like, they understand that there are systems and structures in this country that are built specifically to exclude people of color and to take away from people of color in order to make things easier for white folks. They're really concerned about this bias. They believe people of color face really significant barriers, and those barriers are real. As a result, they support progressive policy agendas. They're also more likely to be women, as well as being either African American or Latinx. So in terms of the opposition, these are the Bootstraps folks, right? Like, these are the folks who think that where you got in life and where they got in life is entirely due to their own personal effort. And no matter who you are, whether you're white, black, or something else, like, if you're having a bad time, if things aren't working out for you, then you should just work harder, right? Get a second job. You can't afford to live here, you should move somewhere else. No one owes you anything. These folks are more likely to be older and white. Obviously not all older. We see Nicole, our friend from the video, was relatively young, but this is what we're looking at in terms of opposition. And then there's a group of people who are persuadable. They're really interesting because they're really swinging back and forth. So the research that was done for the race class narrative shows that this group of folks, 72% believe that we have to talk about race in order to move forward and to have greater equality for everyone. 65% think that talking about race actually can make things worse, right? If you talk about race, you're maybe the real racist. I know all of us in this audience are good enough mathematicians to understand that 72 and 65 adds up to more than 100, right? So it's really kind of any given day, any given environment or message that folks are getting in this persuadable group, whether they're going to fall on the side of we need to talk about race or the side of we can't talk about race at all. So it's a fascinating group. They basically mirror the voting public, a little bit more male, a little bit tend to be younger, but basically this is the folks next door. These are the folks who are going to be lining up at the ballot drop box with you on November 3rd to drop off your ballot, right? This is just folks. So enter the race class narrative. I mentioned you may have heard of this before, and I hope you have. It was developed by ASO Communications, which is the communications firm founded by Anat Shankar-Osorio, who was your keynote speaker at Housing Washington last year. Developed by ASO in partnership with DEMOS and with SEIU, our international union. SEIU locals across the country have embedded the race class narrative in our messaging work. And it's also being used all over in states that are really fighting for progressive policies, Minnesota and Pennsylvania among them. So the race class narrative is unique in that it discusses race overtly, right? It doesn't assume understanding, and it doesn't try to shy away from the issue in order to make people comfortable. It discusses race overtly and really aims to help people understand that racism is used to divide people from one another, and that division is hurtful to all of us. It doesn't just hurt people of color, it hurts all of us. And then it connects the idea of unity to racial justice and economic prosperity. So there is no economic justice and economic prosperity without racial justice. There's no affordable housing or housing justice without racial justice. There's no environmental justice without racial justice, right? It's all interconnected. So what's the impact? The race class narrative helps our supporters feel heard and motivated. When you look at the demographics of our supporter group, what you see is that these are folks who are often actually the ones who are personally experiencing the racism in our society, right? And so if we are going out there with a message that doesn't mention race, that tries to talk about all people without being specific about who all of those people are, if we're talking about housing, which is an issue that has been freighted by the racial politics of this country since the beginning, there's a big chunk of our potential supporters who are going to feel like they're not really being seen. They're not really part of the message. This isn't really for them. But by actually incorporating this understanding and explicit commentary around race, our supporters are going to be more motivated. They will feel heard. And even, you know, folks who are not people of color, are white audience members in this supporter group. You know, there's a lot of people who want to see a different world. They want to see a country where we can be unified and we can break through and finally actually heal these issues. And those folks are going to be motivated too. Using this kind of messaging helps us potentially connect with these persuadable folks, the folks who are swinging on that pendulum between talk about it and don't talk about it. You know, it's sort of a 50-50 whether we're going to be able to snag them, but this at least gives us the opportunity to light that spark for them, right? To catch them on that day when they're open to thinking about discussing race and thinking about creating a more equitable world. This actually has the opportunity to inspire them, and it wins back some of the ground that our dog whistle opposition has taken from us by not being explicit about race, right? The reason they're not explicit about race is that they want to comfort the comfortable, right? They want to make exclusionary thinking, exclusionary practices feel comfortable. So using a race class narrative helps us potentially grab some of our persuadables, and then it's going to frustrate the opposition. Folks who oppose the work we do are going to see themselves losing some ground, and they'll see that theirs isn't the only message that's breaking through. So this is kind of the core message of the race class narrative, and I have the link down here to race class narrative action, which I really encourage you to visit at some point to see all the different resources that they have. But this is the core message. No matter where we come from or what our color, most of us work hard for our families. But today, certain politicians and their greedy lobbyists hurt everyone by handing kickbacks to the rich, defunding our schools, and threatening our seniors with cuts to Medicare and Social Security. Then they turn around and point the finger for our hard times at poor families, Black people, and new immigrants. We need to join together with people from all walks of life to fight for our future, just like we won better wages, safer workplaces, and civil rights in our past. By joining together, we can elect new leaders who work for all of us, not just the wealthy few. Right, so breaking this down, this really starts with the value statement, the same way that we've been starting our messages. So discusses race overtly within that value statement, and discusses race as something that includes everyone, no matter where we come from, right? And then racial scapegoating is explicitly named as a weapon that is used to divide us and that harms all of us. Doesn't just harm the people that it's aimed at, it harms everyone. So after that problem statement, the emphasis is on unity and acting in a collective way. This is very much in line with a lot of the work that we have done to talk about collectivism rather than that individual bootstrap thing. And then similar to kind of that message about, hey, we've done this before, right? We have the solutions, we know how to do this, we have all the tools in our tool belt, we just have to use them and fund them, right? This message invokes cross-racial solidarity. All of those times in our past when we've come together, many of us, to make a little bit of progress, and it's been a success. And then it finishes by connecting the role of government to collective action. So government is that vehicle that we are able to work through in order to achieve what we want to for all of us. So that's kind of the core message from the race class narrative. So this is my attempt to put together a basic core housing message from the race class narrative. No matter where we come from or what our color, we all do better when we have an affordable place to live. But today, certain groups are aligning to fight every effort to build homes that all of us can afford. Then, when housing costs go through the roof, they turn around and point the finger for our hard times at poor families, Black people, and new immigrants. We need to join together with people from all walks of life to build inclusive neighborhoods, just like we've done to win better wages, safer workplaces, and civil rights in our past. By joining together, we can create housing that's affordable for all of us, not just the wealthy few. To break this down in the same way, excuse me, we use, a similar message around all of us doing better when we have an affordable place to live. We use a similar message to what we've been using for many years, but adds that explicit and unifying message around no matter who we are, where we come from, what our color, we're all the same. Makes race explicit in a positive way. And then it names racial scapegoating as an issue. And, we know, right, that racial scapegoating has been a huge part of the opposition message around anything to do with affordable housing, right? If you think back to the mortgage crisis and the terrible blaming and shaming conversation around, well, we tried too hard to make mortgages available in Black communities, and this is what happens. We have a mortgage crisis, when it absolutely was not the fault of individuals, and individuals of color in particular, right? It was a huge systemic issue. We see this scapegoating over and over and over again. So let's make it explicit, right? We know the score. So once we have our problem statement, we emphasize the unity in action. This isn't too much different from the core message of the race class narrative to begin with, but it is also really similar to a lot of the ways that we try to talk about what we're able to accomplish. Cross-racial solidarity. And then joining together to create inclusive communities, to create housing that's affordable for all of us. I think this is something that is really closely connected to what we've been doing before, but just brings in this realism and explicit understanding of the racial dynamics and undercurrents. So if you're thinking of trying to incorporate some of the race class narrative into your work, here's a little bit of a checklist for you. There's a more comprehensive checklist that you can find at raceclassnarrativeaction.com, and I really encourage you to go there. But number one, your message leads with a shared value. We're all on board with this, right? We're already doing it. But that shared value message references race explicitly and in a positive way. Messages name an active villain. So we can be explicit about the fact that there are folks in our communities who are right? Busily creating websites and Facebook groups and going on TV to try to sow fear and racially animated fear around the work that we're trying to do. We can name the racial scapegoating or the kind of deliberate division that these opponents are trying to sow, and make explicit that this isn't just an accident that they're doing this, right? There's a reason they're going to benefit from this. Folks are trying to protect their property values. They're trying to, they've got theirs, right? And they want to protect it. We can be explicit about that. And then we want to make sure that our messages are focusing on outcomes. They're not on specific policies or procedures. So, you know, eventually you're going to get into the details about the development you're trying to build or the policy proposal you're trying to get passed. But for that top line message, for that core message that you're using to build support for all the work that you do, you're focusing on that aspirational solution. You're focusing on what we're all going to get out of this once this work is done. And then so key is that the message says what you're for. It doesn't repeat the opposition messages. It doesn't give life to the ideas that we're against. This is about us. This is about what we're fighting for. This is about all of the good work that we're trying to do. And we repeat those messages. We don't give airtime to the opposition. Again, there's a more complete checklist and a ton more information at the Race Class Narrative website, which I strongly encourage you to take a look at. But this is kind of your roadmap for how you can think through building your own messages using the Race Class Narrative. So now I am happy to take questions if there are any.
And Amy, right now, we're just waiting for any questions to come in.
Wonderful.
If you have a question, if you could type it in the chat box, we'll relay it to Amy.
And if you don't have a question now, or this isn't the venue that you feel most comfortable asking a question in, I have a profile on the conference website, and I will, I'll be keeping up with that throughout the day. I think you can send me a message there. So please feel free to do that as well if you think of something later or if that works better for you.
Okay, we have the first question in. What are some of the results you've seen?
Yeah, so, you know, I think what local unions around the country and in our at 1199 Northwest here in Washington State, what we have seen is that the people of color in our membership, particularly the African American members of our union, when we have used this kind of messaging, they kind of come out of the woodwork to be involved. So a lot of what we try to do as a union is to really make sure that everything is really driven by members. And we have a lot of members who, you know, feel like, or have in the past felt like this really isn't for them. They want to do their activism somewhere else. But when we have opened the door to being explicit about how, you know, in our case, employers will often use race to divide workers, seeing themselves in that message and seeing that we are a place that understands what they are going through in that really particular way has opened the door for so much more engagement and kind of work together, basically.
Okay, next question is, can you give an example of messaging where you name the villain?
Yeah. So, you know, our context, of course, is with employers. But so one kind of specific that we call out is when a lot of employers will try to have, in holding contract bargaining sessions, they will try to separate the nurses who are predominantly white and have a higher level of education. They will try to separate bargaining with nurses from bargaining with the service employees who, generally speaking, so this is hospital housekeepers and dietary workers. Those bargaining units tend to be immigrants, people of color, people with less formal education, a ton of training to do their work, but management will separate or try to separate that bargaining. And so we use messaging with our members that explains, management wants to separate you because they don't want you, they don't want everyone to work together, and they want to, they're explicitly trying to divide you because they know if you're separate that they can treat the service unit in a less equitable way. So
Okay.
and that's not a nice clean message, right? But that's kind of what we would point out to folks.
Okay, Amy, we've got, I think, time for 2 more questions that had come in. But at the end, if you could address whether participants can get a copy of your presentation, and I will just make a note that the session is being recorded. So as an attendee, you can come back and watch that and access Amy's presentation. But if you want an actual copy, you probably will need to connect with her in the platform and just send her an email. So next question is, are there any complications for this race class narrative because of the recent executive order?
Oh gosh, that's a great point. So, right, so there is an executive order around I hate giving your time to this, but I appreciate the question. So the president is trying to ban federally funded groups from talking about critical race theory or reality. I don't know. Probably. It's definitely something that if I had federal funding, I would want to be careful about and consult, consult the folks you consult on compliance. So that is a concern.
Okay, and the last question is, if an organization does not have relationships with BIPOC orgs in it, community, in quotes yet, how do we reach out to build them?
Oh gosh. So that's such an interesting question. I would love for you to message me in the platform too. I'd love to kind of hear more about this. We may have some resources that can be helpful in sort of thinking through that. I mean, I think the first thing that you need to do is have a really honest internal discussion about why those relationships don't exist. So is there something, what is it about the way that you have framed your work that has made it so that hasn't been sort of a natural part of the work that you do? I know, Washington State geographically, there's a lot of diversity in kind of where there are more and fewer people of color. But in our organizing in Montana, we organize at the hospital in Kalispell, Montana, which is a very white part of Montana. But there are also a lot of Native Americans and Latinx folks who are in the community. And because of the way that that our world is so divided, a lot of our nurses there hadn't really thought about that landscape of their community, or it's something that, where as white people were kind of taught to kind of not think about. But you know, even if you're in a predominantly white part of Washington State, those community groups are there. If you're reaching out to folks, I think it's important to be honest that this is something new to you, that this is a relationship that you haven't built, acknowledge that, and instead of coming with, you'll have your own ideas and that's fine, but come with questions, and come prepared to learn, and come prepared to listen.
Great. Well, I want to just say a quick thank you to Amy for joining us today and presenting such great information. I've noted in the chat that you can connect with her in the platform if you have any additional questions. And again, as an attendee, you can come back and access these recorded sessions after today's event. So certainly if you have any questions beyond that, feel free to reach out to our team. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks everyone.